I think it began really through my interest in drawing, and that translated itself into using thread. And thread, to me, is the best tool to draw with. I mean, I'm frequently asked, why don't I use pen or why don't I use pencil? And I do as a research tool, and I do when I'm looking at influences from art history and when I go to galleries, etc. But it makes more sense for me to go and produce the finished work in a material that inspires me and a material that conveys the marks that I want to convey. So I suppose I approach it from a drawing point of view. I call these drawings, I call them stitched drawings or drawings, and frequently people would say to me, but they look like drawings, and I kind of have to stamp my foot and say they are drawings. Drawing is I suppose a description. It describes line and form and tone and texture, and hopefully gets some kind of emotive response as well. The element of thread just grabs me because it itself is sort of floating. It has its own shadow, which in itself creates tone. As the lines and as the threads overlap and kind of have conversations with each other, they in themselves create other qualities to the marks. And I would think, why not use thread rather than why use thread, because it is a very rich material with endless possibilities. The starting points are really wide and varied, and I constantly carry sketchbooks with me. I have little tiny ones that fit in my handbag, and I have even tinier ones that fit in my pockets, and big ones for the car, so that when ideas come, that there's somewhere to record them. I look a lot to the past, to the old masters. I don't necessarily look to textiles for inspiration. Subject matter is frequently things that are very close to me, and that is family, my children, my connections I have with people. And a lot of the work here is about how we connect with each other and how we need each other, and through those elements of passion, protection and hope. There are three sort of strands throughout my work that are presented in very, very different ways. And I know that other people have looked at the work and may not necessarily see that in them, but I find that quite thrilling actually, that somebody will see something completely different in the work. And take different interpretations out of it that I may not have meant to put in, but somehow has sneaked into the work. Okay, this piece is called Tempting, and I'm quick to point out that there are two characters in it, although the second character may not be absolutely obvious initially. The actual execution of the folds and the cloth, it was part from earlier. It was inspired by just looking at folds and studies and cloth, and I remember as a child in the National Gallery looking at the paintings of the very formal paintings of, the noble people, if you like, in their velvets and their lace, and almost getting angry at how beautifully it was done, because I couldn't conceive of how it could possibly be made like that. So that's in terms of this as part of the subject matter. I wanted to set myself a challenge to see if I could draw it in thread. The character itself, the main character, I just want to convey elements of hesitation, of a story, of what's going on here, of what might happen, possibilities, those things that we all feel at different times, of things that might happen or might not happen. And the other character might be about to happen and might not be, and perhaps it's in his head or not. There's movement in it, I hope, through the area here, which is done much lighter, much sketchier, and a bit more fluid. In fact, these areas here, there's one or two threads that are the stitches are several inches long. In terms of technique, the technique I used for this was really me trying to push my machine past what I felt it was even wanting to do. I broke many needles on this, and I didn't break one needle on the rest of the entire show. And that's because although a machine is quite rhythmic, you're moving the cloth forwards and backwards to create the marks, I was trying to make it do something different, and that was quite agitated moves and very swift movements and then very slow ones. And that's what I needed to get these huge stitches, which are about 3 or 4 inches in size in some cases. And that gave that kind of fluid mark that creates the tone and in time creates the form and hopefully the texture of the cloth. I suppose to a certain degree the inspiration comes from the material, and I spoke a little about that earlier, about thread and how really working with it and getting to know your material helps you to know how far you can push it. So the contrast of using stitching in bronze and stitching in plaster and using gold leaf, all other really interesting materials, I just felt had a voice to place within the making of these artworks that supported the thread work and the stitched work, that sort of gave it a presence, and the contrast of the cold against the warmth and the familiarity of thread and cloth. And I felt that gave a little strength and an emotional response to some of the items. For instance, the I Place in the series, which is tiny plastered dresses with medical drawings stitched into them, or the Passio and Protection series, which is bronze with stitching in it. There's about 30 pieces in the Narative line exhibition from me. And I had to cull it down. I had about 80 pieces planned, although I knew I would never actually finish all of those for this, because you always have to make more than what you need, because you have to leave room for mistakes and room for the pieces that work in your head and work on paper but don't work in the material that you're making it in. So what I was trying to show in here was the breadth of ideas to do with the themes that I spoke about, the hope, passion, protection and connections between people, but also to push the material from a technical point of view as a maker. And there's more that I want to do. I've started experimenting casting drawings and casting from thread and printing from thread and all of these other areas that I'm not an expert in, and I will work with people who are experts in those materials. Well, I want to explore the wearable drawings more. From the point of view of, I just like the idea, two ideas. One, that it's portable, that you literally could take it, and the old tradition of miniatures, pre-photography, where you take it and carry it around with you. Back then it was of a loved one or something like that, but just something precious and that is moving to you. But also from the point of view that a wearable drawing, in the case of the pieces here where they're strung on a piece of red velvet quite simply tied around your neck, that it's a different way for the viewer to see the piece, that it is viewed not on a gallery wall, but that as you move around and the light interacts with it and your body interacts with it, and it becomes a conversation piece with other people viewing it. So it's kind of bringing it to life to a degree. So I want to do more along that line. I've mentioned earlier the aspect of exploring stitch with printmaking, and I'm not quite sure where that's going to go, and nor should I really. I have ideas in my head, but it is important to allow it to go in whatever route it's going to go in, and to get the material, start becoming more familiar with the techniques and seeing what I can do when I learn new techniques to push with the materials. The other area that I've started to do a little bit more on is I've been getting a little bit more of commissions of portraits, where people see the work, see the likenesses of the characters. You know, there's my children are in there, my other relatives, where people are coming along saying, "Can you do a portrait of my child?" And it's an old tradition. While I have been asked to do a few of those commissions, I'll be putting my own slant on them, my own compositional edge in them. You know, usually lots of space, etc. But that's kind of exciting to me, that people want to own a piece which is a traditional subject matter to have a portrait, but that it's done in an unusual material. The wearable drawings are presented in very old objects. They are presented as wall pieces, and they may never leave the wall. They may live on somebody's wall as an art piece on the wall, but they are individual drawings which are housed in Victorian watch cases, and in some cases, some of them are mourning lockets. And they hang on a tiny hook inside a linen-backed recessed frame. And to wear them, if you decide to do so, you can remove them from their hook, string it on the piece of velvet which is embedded in the back of the frame, and wear it out. The pieces themselves are an important part of the presentation of the drawing, because each object holds in itself its own history. So that pocket watch lived in somebody's pocket for who knows how many years, or inside of the lockets lived a fragment of hair, a photograph of a loved one, and they were precious objects, and they were held in somebody's hand, and there's marks and there's scratches on them, and they have a whole history and a whole story behind them, and that is an intrinsic part of each of those pieces for me. I spent quite a long time sourcing these pieces and finding a huge selection of the ones, and finally deciding which drawings went with which pieces, and I would love to know where they actually originally, who owned them, but maybe I don't need to know. It's just they something else lives inside the back of those, I think. If somebody is getting into craft as a career, I think it is hugely important to apply all of the work ethics you apply to any other career, and that is that you don't do things by half measures, that you don't fall at the first hurdle. If you're ambitious to do this, then you make it as perfect a job as you possibly can. There's that phrase out there, sure it'll do at some point. You never let that phrase get into your work, that you always expect excellence from yourself, because you have to present the absolute very best. It's a very competitive world, and as is any of the arts worlds, I suppose. And I suppose if you produce work which is genuine and from your gut, and that you have put your own voice into, instead of taking on constantly other outside influences, which are helpful and inspiring, but you have to keep fighting through those to make sure that your own voice goes into the work. And other than that, I suppose it's very important that you keep making and seeking out opportunities and galleries to show your work. You may wish them to be in certain galleries, but if at first they don't end up in those galleries, you have to keep showing wherever you can, and your voice will be spotted at some point.